Okay, today is a big day around the world. We talk about the death penalty, and there's been a campaign, a global push against the death penalty globally. And on this particular day is the 21st World Day Against the Death Penalty. We are joined by two guests in the studio. One of them is the Minority Leader in the National Assembly, the Honorable OPIYO Wandayi, and the other one is Julie Wayua Matheka, the Program Manager at ICJ Kenya. Good morning, Mheshimiwa. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, both of you are Mheshimiwa then.
I was going to ask you, sure.
Julie amepata kura ngapi?
I have gotten votes at some point in my life.
Okay. Sawa. So, Waheshimiwa, good morning and welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. Happy Utamaduni Day as you join us. Yeah, it's also Utamaduni Day. And happy World Day Against the Death Penalty. It's a big one. It's a big one. Mheshimiwa, it's been a while. We wanted to have you here for a while. It's pleasure to have you.
The time has come.
The hot seat of the Situation Room welcomes you. Julie has been here before, but not seated. She's been here standing. Karibu tena, Julie.
Thank you very much.
To welcome you to the conversation, CT has the day's proverb. Today's proverb is from
the United Republic of Tanzania. A country within the Great Lakes region, whose capital is Dodoma. No
Okay.
less. Okay? Third largest country on the continent. The proverb is a simple, easy to understand proverb for a slow, pleasant day like today. Every bird flies with its own wings.
Every bird flies with its own wings.
Yes.
Okay, I'll go here with rank. Minority Leader, what is your interpretation of this?
Well, every bird obviously has to fly with its own wings. Yeah. It would perhaps mean that one has to use what they own to make ends meet for themselves. Yes.
It's a good one,
Yeah.
Julie.
I would say you chart your own destiny. Depending on the hard work and the things that you do, you'll be able to soar. So you chart your own destiny. So bidii yako.
CT?
Yes, we usually award marks for the effort, and it's usually from a scale of 1 to 100. Well, whatever I feel like. But today, it'll be out of 20.
It's a Tamaduni Day.
Yes, exactly. So, Mheshimiwa, it's out of 20, you've got 21.
What?
And you also have 21.
Why not?
We have overachieved.
Well, yes, because when we ask for your opinion and you give it,
Yes.
you've clearly understood the question and you've responded appropriately.
What more could you ask for?
Yes,
What more could you ask?
really.
Julie, what is ICJ Kenya? Let's start with that.
Thank you. ICJ Kenya is a member organization that is basically an NGO, first of all. We have membership from the bar, the bench, advocates, people with a legal training. We are founded on the principles that we all want to achieve human rights, democracy, rule of law within Kenya, but we also work within Africa. So that is what ICJ is. We were founded in 1959, so we're one of the oldest human rights organizations in Kenya.
On this day, when the world is marking the World Day Against the Death Penalty, why is the world marking a day against the death penalty? And who established this? Who said today is the day?
Okay. So ICJ has been a member of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty since inception, really. And every year we realize that all countries celebrate their own milestones around human rights. But why not come together on a question of the death penalty? So this was constituted 20 years ago, actually. 20 years ago, because you're on the 21st day. And ICJ and the Kenya Human Rights Commission in Kenya are a member of the World Coalition. So that is how it came to be.
So, when you say you are against the death penalty, what do you mean?
We believe that the death penalty is a violation of human rights because of, first of all, how it is meted out, the manner in which people are executed. It is wrong. It is cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment because in some countries it's done through gas, other countries lethal injection. Our country, if it was to be done, it would be done by hanging until death, which is actually very cruel if you think about the process itself.
Okay.
So it's cruel, inhumane treatment. Not only does it do that in terms of the execution, but let's look at it from the point of determination that you are guilty and you're sentenced to death. If you did not get the right fair trial processes accorded to you, you will feel that the whole process has been unjust.
Okay.
So either you are tortured for a confession, you did not get adequate legal representation, you are not conversant with the language of the court, because our courts speak in mostly English or Swahili.
Okay.
So if you're not really conversant with the processes, everything becomes unjust. So at point of sentence. Then we go into the point of you are now incarcerated. Depending on the time frame that you take, if you're 20 years on death row, it is such a different scenario for you. You're isolated, you don't get access to a lot of family members because maybe they abandoned you. Some family members are not very okay with a family member being on death row, so you get abandoned, you get isolated by your own family. But within the prison system, you're isolated from other inmates because death row inmates don't interact with others for security reasons, but also that is how it has been since colonialism.
For whose security?
Inmate security.
Of the other inmates.
The other inmates.
The other inmates.
Okay.
Death row inmates are considered
Very dangerous.
very dangerous, yet some of them are actually pretty harmless.
Dangerous.
No, we have interacted. Some of them are really good.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the idea. So there are very many levels of the torture element that we have really looked at ICJ, and we do believe it's actually torture.
Okay.
And of course, the last thing, the deprivation of life. I mean, life is sacred.
Okay.
And by virtue of you implementing the death penalty, it means you deprive of life.
All right.
Yeah.
Maybe this is something also for you, Moshimi, that you can come into. Under what circumstances, because the death penalty is a sentence, right? Under what circumstances is the death penalty then given as a sentence for an individual? What crime must you have committed
Okay.
in order for that to be...
In our statutes, especially the penal code, death sentence is for what they call capital offenses. And these are basically murder, treason, robbery with violence, and in fact, attempted robbery with violence. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's take the first one, murder.
Murder.
You killed somebody, an
Yes.
individual, took the life
Yes.
of somebody else.
Yes.
Under what circumstances, we do not know. Let's remove this element of maybe they went through trial and it was not them. These individuals with evidence meeting the threshold for conviction have been convicted and sentenced to death. Let's take murder, for example. And so when initially those who came up with this in the first place, I believe the dictum was a life for a life. You take one, yours then is taken from you. How would we argue outside of that before we go to these other ones?
But you see, the world has progressed. The world has really progressed. From the time you would say an eye for an eye. Yes, because that was the argument. Therefore, if one was convicted of rape, then he should be raped. It doesn't follow, really. Yes. If you say that one has murdered, and therefore you should be killed, okay?
You've also murdered.
You've also murdered.
Okay.
So the state is also committing murder, okay? So it doesn't help. It doesn't really help at all. And for Kenya, coming back home, we are alive to the fact that our own constitution, at Article 26, yes, guarantees life. Okay.
So what then should we do with murderers? People who...
We are proposing. If you read my bill, amendment bills, we are proposing that we sentence them to life imprisonment.
Okay.
Okay. Which therefore gives them an opportunity to be rehabilitated. Okay. And if they reform sufficiently, they can even be pardoned under special circumstances. So really. So don't kill someone, which is actually...
just because they kill.
Yeah, which is basically... killing is a finality. The guy will never come back to life.
But usually, if they are convicted and there's evidence, we're looking at the killing and not looking at perhaps, or we are looking, but we're not stating the social ramifications of that particular act. Somebody who has chosen a career in robbing people with violence, because you choose. Somebody who has chosen that in the process of robbing, they do not mind taking other people's lives.
Or raping people.
Or raping people or pillaging, just the things that they do. are you then not saying that this is a person who has chosen a life of depriving other people of their rights? And so that if they are that way inclined, should they then not be removed
From society.
from normal? Yes, because they are an anathema to the people who they are supposed to exist among.
But come to think of it, even with the death penalty remaining in our statutes, when was last time you had anybody in Kenya who was executed?
In fact, this is interesting that you
Yes.
asked this, Moshima, because last week there was a guest here from the prison service. He was at our sister station, and I
Yes.
had a conversation with him.
Yes.
And in the prison where he is
was.
a prison where he serves,
Yes.
there are 400 inmates
Yes.
on death row. 400
That's the point.
on death row, right?
Yes.
And we were to ask the question, if they are on death row waiting for the gallows,
To be hanged.
why has this not happened
Correct.
in Kenya?
Because the state seems to also have some fears executing people.
And what are these fears?
The last,
That is what Parliament should
the
be
last,
telling the state. Do what you're supposed to do. They are costing us.
The last execution.
Expensive to keep them alive.
The last execution was done, I think, in 1987. That of Ochuka and Uteo.
And-
Okay.
Okay, was that even witnessed? I mean,
Well,
I've
it
heard
was
about
reported.
it.
It was reported.
Yeah. For all we know, they are living somewhere.
But let me tell you, the waiting itself is even more torturous
I agree.
than the actual execution.
I agree with you completely.
Yes, we are told in the prisons, those who are on death row, they are called condemned. Yes, they are being taunted every day by our prison warders that the day has come, and the day never comes. That day never comes. The day for the hangman to come and
Moshima, can we take this discussion a little back?
yes,
And let's not touch with the perpetrator. Let us, because this is a debate in places where the death sentences exist in some states and not in others. The ecosystem that breeds such individuals in numbers that we may consider alarming. There are people who, by virtue of their mental state and inclination, are inclined in a certain direction. They are given to doing things that other people don't do. And some of them don't have a problem doing those things that other people don't do. For them, it's normal. But then there are others whose circumstances initiate into the things that may end up in someone dying and then being accused. Now, we talk of rehabilitation. If you look at that ecosystem that breeds this person, then you look at the ecosystem within our prison system. That prison system does not, if it rehabilitates you into being far worse than what you were when you went in. So this rehabilitation process that we speak of, what really is it? How is it that people are released from prison, many of them not long after are back again? Because
The same day.
yes,
well, Julie can help us understand.
I think there have been some successful rehabilitation programs. The prison project that was done in Kamiti Prison, whereby death row inmates or persons whose whose death sentences have been commuted to life, were actually given the opportunity to study. And some of them have gotten degrees in law from the University of London and have left the prison system after their sentences were commuted and have come and are now lawyers within the society.
so you have murderers who are lawyers.
We have persons who were previously on death row who have now been released, who are now lawyers. It is a bit difficult, of course, for them to practice, but they do have the opportunity to be members and contributors to the society. So some rehabilitation
I take
has
it
worked.
that they studied criminal law.
They studied law. Potentially with an emphasis on criminal law because of what they had gone through.
Because their own personal experience.
Because of their own personal experience. And actually it really helps a lot because when
But
we
the conviction was not lifted.
the conviction was,
It's the
Ideally-
sentence that was commuted.
the sentence was commuted, and some of them had really sustained their perception of innocence until the last day when their sentences were commuted. So you really never know whether the person was innocent or guilty. There are some who have left and reopened their cases just so that they can get an innocent verdict, because ideally once your sentence is commuted, unfortunately you are still guilty as of the point.
Sure. I understand the human rights aspect. And I think, it's not very difficult to explain, right? In terms of this person in an isolated space away from the crime they may or may not have committed. In a lot of cases they would have, right? But why it is important to explain this properly is usually for the minds of the people who cannot reconcile with the fact that their child, their family member, their spouse, whomever was murdered by this person, that we're now trying to say, you know what, we need to recognize their rights. It's important to explain where this is coming from, because that memory, that experience with this other person remains emblazoned in the minds of the people that you're now trying to say, guess what? This man or woman then also has rights which we must consider. So even as we're talking about looking into the abolition of this death penalty, how are we going to explain it in a manner that the woman's son who was brutally murdered, or the man's wife who was brutally murdered, you are now thinking about the rights, and they will ask the questions, who thought about the rights of my husband? Who thought about the rights of my child? And it is brutally important to explain where that is coming from.
But again, isn't imprisonment itself punishment enough? Because for sure,
Is it?
Yeah, if you are in prison for life, yes, it is serious punishment. Yeah. That should actually address the concerns or the feelings of the victims' relatives.
Which well, it's two-pronged really, because on the one hand, if someone perpetrates such a crime, in the wake of such a crime, there are very many people who have to endure that loss.
Yes.
Okay. Now, are we saying that what you and the ICJ are saying is that the restitutive process that is being alluded to is one where one even makes peace with the people they have caused the pain, and that secondly, they themselves are brought to an understanding of what it is that they did, because you can't rehabilitate someone if they do not understand what they did, the ramifications of it, so that they now have an opportunity to change from what they were. Are you saying that these and other processes that guarantee that the restitutive process has taken place to the extent that the perpetrator has made attempts to make peace with the people who were bereaved and who were in pain?
Our criminal justice system doesn't actually allow for that. I don't know. But because I remember when I was discussing this thing with my colleagues in Parliament, some of my colleagues from Northeastern were actually saying we don't even want people to be taken to court. They should be allowed to talk to the victims' families and pay camels. You know, it's something which is not within our legal framework. Okay, but it can be considered. The most important thing is that we want society to live in harmony. Okay, even as you punish offenders,
justice.
Even as you punish offenders, society must live in harmony. That's really the objective. Yes, of law.
And not all losses of death arise from what we normally consider when there are robbery gone wrong, or somebody who is psychopathic or what have you. It could be an altercation. It could be anything that accidentally and incidentally ends up in death. But the end of it, you've killed. Okay.
But that may not be murder. Murder is defined clearly in
yes,
in
you're
law.
talking about manslaughter and things like that. You see, why am I bringing in manslaughter? It's because there's a loss of life.
Yes.
And so long as there's a loss of life, there is a restitutive process. Look, why do we have the Peace and Reconciliation Forum in this country? South Africa had it. Why? It's because amidst everything we discuss, lives were lost. And until there is a semblance of understanding that can bring about peace, and it can bring about someone coming to terms with those things, then, if you ask me, justice has not been served.
Okay, allow me to chime in here. We do normally get the victims' perspectives in these matters. The Victim Protection Act actually allows for a victim's voice to be heard within the criminal justice process. So we do get the perspective of the victim and the family, particularly, of the person. And in this entire debate of the death penalty, we are not negating the impact that it has on the victims' families. I think I want to come up front and say that. But what we are saying is, even the victims sometimes, they say that for us, whether or not you kill the person who killed our person, it will not bring us back our person. So their perception of justice is not the execution of the person. It's for this person to appreciate what they did, how it impacted our society, to reform, rehabilitate, and become a champion against what they did.
Okay.
Because that is how they perceive justice. The other thing around victims is sometimes even the implementation of the death penalty contravenes their beliefs, both personal beliefs and religious beliefs. Because there are some people who are actually of the conviction that you cannot kill another person. So by implementing the death penalty, you are further violating their personal belief, because now they have violated their religious beliefs because of what they will subject that person to.
Right.
So it's a mixed perspective from the victims, and I don't think all of them ascribe to the eye for an eye mentality.
Yes.
However, it's important that we do not also pardon people. I mean, if you have committed a murder, it is a very serious offense, and that is why we are looking at
rape, if you've
So
committed
there should be
robbery
some
with
punishment
violence.
of sorts. And Mheshimiwa, you're saying, so what you're proposing is, let's actually have life imprisonment instead of the death penalty.
Yes, correct.
Do you think that will be justice enough? Because there are very many people who, like Julie, just before the break, you were saying, one of the things that you do is you engage with the victims, and even the court process allows for the victims to actually come out and speak. And in many cases, the victims do not necessarily support the death penalty. They don't even support some of these punishments that are being meted out by the court. All they want is for this person whom they hold accountable for the crime to acknowledge that this is what we did. So then, should we then say that as long as a person has come and said, "Enye poleni,"
Yeah, but again,
go home?
as Jesus was saying, nothing will ever return back the person who has died. Yes,
True.
And therefore the punishment is not really meant to to bring back the person to life. In the same way, if a guy was charged with robbery with violence, in which somebody suffered maybe serious injuries, okay, he was maimed.
Yep.
Okay, even if you kill him, the guy would never regain his original health. So really, it's a question of basically meting out punishment, which is commensurate with the offense. Okay, with the offense, and to act as a deterrence to the rest of society. But also, but more critically, is to reform the offender, so that when he comes out, he's able to be useful to society. That's basically the intention.
But this is life imprisonment. Life imprisonment does not have life and come out.
You will not come out.
No, we are actually working on that again. The life imprisonment is also being
with the
looked at.
possibility of some parole at some point.
Yes.
Why?
So
this
it's
is a
not-
cost.
it's not absolute.
Why somebody who has been found guilty by a court of law of having committed this very atrocious crime being committed at the cost of everybody else to go through this prison system where we are rehabilitating them and hoping that in 40 years' time they will be rehabilitated.
In their old age.
Yeah. Why are you subjecting the entire country to that?
In fact, some studies have shown, and Julie can also say this, that even those who have been found guilty of these offenses, capital offenses, and are on death row, a majority of them are the poor.
Yeah.
Okay? You must also understand.
Yeah.
And therefore, what makes it possible that it's only the poor who end up being on the death row and not the rich? There could be something, okay, in the criminal justice system, okay? And therefore, you want to give everybody a chance. Everybody a chance. And the Constitution.
Why is it that only those who are poor end up? Is it that they end up with a conviction or they end up with a prosecution?
Well, the studies have shown. I'm sure you can explain better. Yes.
I think the studies have shown that a lot of persons who end up in the criminal justice system generally are poor and vulnerable, be it for serious offenses, but also for petty offenses. But since today's on the serious offenses, I'll go in that general direction. So on the serious offenses, the questions begin from the fact that at point of arrest, many do not understand the crime that they committed. One would imagine that potentially depriving someone of their property in a forceful nature in the company of another person would just be threatening. But it's actually robbery with violence, because that is one of the elements, to be in the presence of two. Not necessarily even wielding a weapon, but in the presence of two. So now you are arrested at that point. You actually agree, because indeed what the police say is what you'll agree to. You go through the criminal justice process. The prosecution prepares their prosecution, a well-tight case. You do not have the resources to get an advocate. Remember that the National Legal Aid Service, which is the body mandated to provide you with legal aid or a legal defense, doesn't have the capacity for the whole country. So they mostly prioritize murder cases and a few other very serious robbery with violence cases and sexual offenses cases. So you do not have an advocate at that point. You go through the process without having the opportunity to adequately defend yourself, and you then get charged with robbery with violence and the death penalty. So I think what we are saying is, and I really want to rehash this, we are not really negating the voice of the victim here. We are not saying that what they did was wrong. I mean, what they did was right. We're saying that every person deserves an opportunity to be heard. Every person deserves fair representation before criminal justice systems. We do not have a perfect system within our criminal justice. And also, when we go into the lives of persons who are incarcerated in prison, we need to have a graduated approach. Because one thing about the death penalty is we actually believe that the people who ought to suffer the death penalty are of the serious of the most serious. And sometimes you find that the people who are there are not really the most serious offenders who deserve the death penalty. But on the merits of it all, from a human rights point of view, no one should deserve the death penalty because of its cruel, inhumane nature. But looking at the point where we are at as Kenya, Kenya has yet to really sign on to a few other protocols that would dictate whether we abolish the death penalty. The second optional protocol, which actually talks about abolition of the death penalty to the ICCPR. We haven't done that. And when we look at the fact that people every single day get sentenced to death, we always leave that as an opportunity for manipulation. Should one day someone wakes up and decides to actually hang everyone, there are people who have gone through their appeal process and the guilty verdicts have been vacated. So we cannot disregard the fact that there are certain innocent people who are actually going on with their lives within the criminal justice system.
Why not advocate for the fixing of the system? The fixing of the system that has led this person to get into the system, and they did not get adequate legal representation. They did not get to understand what their charges are. They did not even get to understand the offense that they've committed. Why not fix that side of the system? But that before you come to this end.
And if I can add something onto that, there have been calls for the institution of the Office of a Public Defender in Kenya today to sort out some of these issues that you talk about. Inadequate representation, when we talk about inability to post bail and bond, when we talk about things like that. Of course, we know that those things are not postable when we're talking about capital offenses. However, if you had the Office of a Public Defender who was able to explain some of these things or essentially defend people, then we would be sorting out the problem. So are we not looking at a system issue as opposed to now dealing with the back end?
And which is easier to sort out, this systems issue or the back end, because that back end is huge.
I mean,
you want to sort out the socioeconomic circumstances that people live in that makes them vulnerable to certain influences, many of which are nefarious. That is really difficult to sort out. But this other one is not that difficult.
I agree, but there are also certain things that are not system issues. When you look at the question of the mandatory death penalty and the nature of the mandatory nature of it all. So the Francis Moruatetu case actually declared mandatory death penalty unconstitutional. The reason for that is because it violated the right to fair trial, which is by virtue of you being charged with murder, the end game.
There can only be one outcome.
There's only one outcome, irrespective of your mitigation. And people had really good mitigation. I know there's a case, let me not cite it. I know there's a case where a person had been beaten brutally by her partner for over 10 years. And one day, she retaliated, but unfortunately the retaliation was very swift
Was fatal.
and final.
Conclusive.
It was a conclusive retaliation, and the person died. She was charged with murder. The mitigation was not considered, and she actually went on death row.
Yes.
But upon appeal, they actually vacated that, and she was released because had they considered the mitigation, this is someone who wouldn't have been in jail. And that is the case for a lot of women. A lot of women actually end up in the system because of intimate partner violence. A lot of people actually end up in the system because of mental issues. And I think as Kenya, we are now waking up to the question around mental illnesses that have actually plagued everyone, including persons in the criminal justice system. So I think there's a lot to unpack in terms of people and their illnesses that have led to them committing certain crimes. But I think the day for us is very symbolic because it allows us to reflect on people who never get the opportunity to be heard.
Okay. But and when all is said,
You're not. Hold on, Moshimo. She has not answered the question. Why not fix those issues?
the problem?
If an issue is legally, a judicial officer is only given one option: mandatory death sentence. Remove that. Remove the mandate for death sentence. And give the judicial officer the discretion to know how to sentence this person.
Somebody cannot argue their case in court because they don't have representation. Institute a public defender.
It's like this issue we've been having with adolescents and sex. I mean, it's the law. two young people who are under the mandatory age of adulthood have sex. One is 17.
One is 18.
One is 18. Suddenly, the one has defiled the other. And yet, when you look at the case, it was consent. But then the law tells you they don't have the wherewithal to give consent because they're minors. Now,
so
surely,
fix the law.
Okay, so I won't talk about Romeo and Juliet cases because I believe there's a task force working on that, but it has been a real issue in the criminal justice system because of the unfortunate incarceration of the boy child. But now moving into the question of mandatory minimums, we have now abolished the mandatory death penalty within the question of murder, but it doesn't apply to the question of robbery with violence, doesn't apply to the question of the others, aiding and abetting, taking an oath to commit a capital offense. The reason being the Supreme Court in 2021 was very clear that this judgment is very strict on the question of murder. Should you want to have the mandatory minimums lifted on the others, then institute a similar case all the way up. And if you look at the question of the Muru Atetu case, it took a very long time before we got that judgment. And at the end of the day, the onus to repeal the laws rests with Parliament.
Yeah.
So that is why we are looking to Parliament to repeal the laws, because ideally, no matter how you go about it, the judiciary will always have its hands tied because they can only declare it unconstitutional and refer it back to the National House. But for us, we are thinking, if you have a parole system, because actually even the parole system was recommended in the task force that was created after the Muru Atetu 1 judgment in 2017. The Attorney General led a task force, and one of the recommendations was to institute a parole board whereby different actors would sit together, look at a particular convict, look at how they have performed within the prison system, look at how they have reformed, get the victims' impact statements from the families, and then with that information assess whether this person could be released. That was something that should have been created. It has been in the books for quite a while. It's not a new thing, but it hasn't worked. So those are the things that are being championed, and I know with the Prison Act that is about to be repealed and the repeal is coming to the House, that is one of the things that they have put in. But moving back, systems have tried to be changed. We have pushed for the National Legal Aid Service to get its legal aid fund. We have also pushed for that in Parliament. If they got well resourced, hopefully they can actually do the job of a public defender because they have that mandate. So I don't think we need a new office. We need to strengthen the National Legal Aid Service because that's one of their core mandates. If you look at the question of mandatory minimums, it's a statute issue. You'd have to repeal the various laws that bind the hands of the judicial officers. If you also look at the question of knowledge, in terms of people understanding what are laws, what actually offenses carry the death penalty or not. That is a question of awareness creation. We rarely do awareness creation on the question of crimes because we assume that you shouldn't do crimes, but people just need to take the initiative to understand what could potentially happen should you commit a particular crime.
It sounds like the solution is actually possible, and the solution lies squarely at your doorstep, Mheshimiwa.
Yes,
Parliament.
It's true. Yeah, and you see now, putting aside the issues of morality, as it is, the death penalty, mandatory death penalty is unconstitutional. The court has declared, the Supreme Court has declared so. And it is as the duty of the legislature, where I sit, to align our statutes with the Constitution. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Because that even if we sat here and waited forever, the death penalty is unconstitutional. And it's important also that we don't leave that kind of confusion or lacuna in the law. Julie talked about Kenya not ratifying the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. Actually, Kenya had signed it.
Yeah, the second option of protocol is that we have refused to sign.
Yes. And it shows you the intention of the country. The country is moving towards the abolition of this death penalty alongside other groups of nations in the world. Okay, so I think it's our duty to do what is right as a parliament, and we have to do it. Yeah, one way or the other.
Why is Parliament not allocating adequate resources to support people who require legal aid? We have a law in place. We have a body in place. Parliament is just not funding it.
Well, you see, Parliament doesn't own money. You see,
Parliament allocates money.
Parliament is the one who says where you spend the money.
You are a budget-making parliament.
I was coming to that. Parliament makes budget based on the available resources.
Yeah.
Yes.
Precisely.
Yes.
But you prioritize.
It's a question of juggling.
Yes.
Where do you put money?
Why haven't you juggled it in that direction?
You see, it's a difficult question because
You don't know anything you go on this one, Mheshimiwa.
if resources are available,
Resources are always available.
no, they're never available.
Yes,
enough.
they are. The beauty of this discipline we call economics is because of the concept of scarcity.
Yes.
Resources are never enough. So because of it, you need to understand how you allocate them and prioritize them. We have a situation here that leads to this unconstitutional issue of the death row and killing people because they have killed. And yet, there's a solution within the grasp of Parliament. Simply allocate funds so that this injustice that occurs because someone is poor, can't get proper defense, can't, at least some sort of mitigation is in place. They are able to actually receive that justice which this very same constitution guarantees.
It's true. It's true. It's a question of prioritizing. Yes.
Okay.
Let me say so. Yeah, because there are so many competing needs for the available resources. Yes.
If we want to stay within the system, and I think you alluded to that, Julie, because there are a number of questions here. Somebody says something like, you know what? You don't even need the death penalty because the states of the prisons and what people have to go through while sitting on that death row, or even not on death row as a condemned offender in remand, is worse than death.
True.
Okay?
Yeah, it's true.
So when we look at the restitutive and the rehabilitative system, does it really work? If we are saying that jail is not, or prison is not a punishment. It's not a punishment. We're saying that it is a restitutive and rehabilitative process. Is that really the case? So then, can funds be budgeted for, legislated for to this process where you say, truly, to the satisfaction and belief of those who are then looking at this thing, will they then be able to rest assured that it truly is a rehabilitative process, to be able to say, actually, you know what, understanding that what you did, number one, was wrong, how have you then come out, if you do come out, a quote-unquote better human being? But for all intents and purposes, prison is punishment. Today, you did this, you will pay by staying locked up for however long that you do. Yeah. So is this not one of the things that ought to be looked at? If we're saying, because I don't think we can deal in that closed spot. You can't say, abolish the death penalty. All right, fine. What happens in this other place where we're saying, okay, then go to prison and stay there for life? The one happens to you, you die, that's it.
Are we sure you're being rehabilitated?
Are we sure?
And actually, that is a big debate right now, because the Court of Appeal has given a decision to the effect that life imprisonment, by the way it is coined in our statute, is actually unconstitutional. Because life ideally should be determinate. Is it natural life? Because if it's natural life, then that is a death penalty. Because ideally you will never leave. You will die within the prison. But you should have a life sentence of 30, 40, 50 years. You should know what you're targeting for in order for you to say that this is the point where I can apply for parole. This is the point where someone can even assess whether you have reformed. So even the whole question around life sentences, one thing that we often forget is when we actually sentence people to death or life sentence, these people enter a system that will become their system for the rest of their lives. So we need to make it a humane place altogether. And for a lot of people who have visited prisons, you can tell that it's not humane. It's not fit for purpose. We haven't really rehabilitated our prisons since the colonial days. I've not heard any single member of parliament talk about we're building a new prison, because it's not a CDF issue. The ministry, the CS will
When was the last time a new prison was
My sister,
built in
we have
Kenya?
not built schools.
I don't know. No, but in fairness,
No, we are building schools.
in fairness, no, we are building schools. We are building hospitals. We are building schools and hospitals, but we have not heard anyone talk about we are building a prison. And that is why when you talk about persons with mental disability who are in the criminal justice system and they need to be housed somewhere, when you talk about Matheka has a bed capacity of, I think, 200 or 300 in the maximum side.
And it's a
already
hospital,
full.
not a jail.
It has both facilities.
Okay.
So it's already full. You don't have a new facility. So indeed, the system isn't fit for purpose today. So a lot of people ought not to be there. So there are whole conversations around decongestion of prisons because of petty offenders. But when you look at the most serious of the serious offenders, are they living in conditions that are humane? No, they are not.
You know this question of building a mental hospital, I could say it's also unconstitutional. It's discriminatory. Oh yes. Why is it that every other disease known to mankind and Kenyans, there's a department for it in a hospital? a regular hospital. But when you have a mental illness, they have to put you away from everybody else and put you in a corner somewhere so everybody knows. Yes. Can you think of the stigma associated with it? The moment you land there.
That's true.
Sometimes also for safety, I think, of the sick and those that are giving them care. Let me say something about the prison. You know, actually, when NAC came to power in 2002,
yes,
and Mudi Awori was made the Minister for Home Affairs and the VP, he did initiate a number of reforms in the prison system.
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
What happened is that these reforms were never carried through. Yeah, after he left, and that's why we are. It's true indeed. It's intriguing that we have now built additional prisons since independence, and yet the population has continued to grow.
Yeah,
but our prisons are not able to accommodate.
We have more judges, more magistrates, more prosecutors.
Yes, but
same number of prisons.
Eric, you know what I find interesting with Mujima, thank you for saying what you just said. Why should we build more prisons? Should we not be decriminalizing our population? It's like saying, guys, we have this situation where, we are a criminal enterprise. So why
it's inevitable
that we need to have.
City, it's inevitable.
You
have a criminal justice system that is increasing in terms of number of courts, number of judges. You definitely have more prisoners.
And it is also like that some of the people in this system themselves are criminals. We understand all that, okay? Have I said something wrong, madam? What I'm saying is this. Do you know anything worse than being put in remand and then forgotten?
It's horrible.
Forgotten. Somebody put you there. They even forgot they put you there. 3 years down the line, you're still there waiting for a case which will never happen. It used to happen when we had detention.
Yeah.
The people who were detained, they were actually forgotten. And somebody, you mean the guy's still in prison? Why? Because they're not even sure what they put him in for in the first place.
Well, the system has changed significantly. I think right now.
Really?
Yes, it has, because of case management at the judiciary and also some systems that have been put in place, including the Uadilifu system by the DPP. People are able to complain. People are able to report. People are able to say whether they've been forgotten within the system. So we have lesser numbers. I'm not saying everything is perfect, but we have lesser numbers of forgotten persons within remand. The unfortunate persons who are actually forgotten within remand are persons who have mental disability, because they themselves cannot move themselves to actually report. So they're a vulnerable group. But now, coming back to the question of the death penalty, I think for us as ICJ, we look at the question of death penalty as it has violated numerous rights. We look at it from the question of deprivation of life is wrong. Cruel, inhumane treatment by virtue of how it's executed is really wrong, because the cruelty of the execution itself, if you look at various reports around the way that the way that the prison system actually responds when an execution is taking place, you will know it not only traumatizes the person who is about to be executed, but all the inmates, because you feel it and you hear it and you know you're next. So it actually traumatizes the various inmates who are inside.
True.
Yes.
But Julie, all those things that ICJ stands for, it stands for them because of the global nature of it, but not contextualizing. Half of the lifetime of ICJ in this country, nobody has been killed. Right?
Well, we were founded in 1959 and the last person executed was
ICJ Kenya.
Yes,
right?
1959.
So all those number of years that we've not seen any execution in this country tells you something. Now, how are we fixing the system? Because I hear, and I hear what you're saying. I hear the bill that Mheshimiwa you've taken to Parliament. It's a step in the right direction, but it's a step. But there are very many other steps to be taken. And what I am raising concern here with is I am not hearing the other steps being followed up with this. Suppose today, yes, Parliament passes this law. Yes, now today Kenya has abolished the death penalty. Yes. In fact, we even signed and ratify those other international protocols, and all those people who are still in prison, so they'll not be killed. So what happens to them? Yes, we are now going to commute you to life in prison. But how do we define life in prison? How are we addressing all those other issues? That is my concern. Because the death penalty itself in this country, we can just remove that issue, the word death penalty. We can remove it from the mandatory death penalty for judicial officers. They don't have to look at it. But have we sorted the issue?
I think
in Kenya, the challenge that we have with the human rights of people who enter the criminal justice system has not been addressed.
I think it's one step. the criminal justice system is quite complex. I don't think we can have a silver bullet for anything. So I think, first of all, abolishing the death penalty will be one step. Qualifying what is life will be another step. Instituting the parole board to look at the people who are in there, and they're not actually just limited to people on life. Parole is actually supposed to be an exhaustive process for anyone who has a long sentence. We'll ensure that people can actually have opportunities to leave the system if they have reformed. When you look at other countries that have actually abolished the death penalty, they actually create systems to ensure that people who are serving long sentences get the opportunity to leave, but people who are not reformed get an opportunity to stay and actually get reformed. So it works both ways. It's not that everyone will be leaving, but it will be a very just and humane way to process people's entry into society. When you look at the other systems that need to be funded, we've talked about the underfunding of the criminal justice system. It's very important to talk about it. We need to fund the criminal justice system. We need to have more advocates, more judges, more magistrates, prosecutors, more trained prison officers. It's a whole ecosystem. So you can't say there's one silver bullet to fixing it, but we will move an inch further if we do abolish the death penalty.
You don't know that the criminal justice system won't get as much money as they want, so long as Parliament decides who's giving the money.
I think that he should.
That's a good challenge. It's a good challenge. We shall take it up.
In what stage is your bill, OPIYO?
Well, the bill has gone through the first reading. Is presently before the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, the JLAC, for processing readiness for the second reading. In other words, it's being subjected to public participation shortly. Yes, and then the committee will do a report to accompany the bill at the second reading stage, where the MPs are going to debate it robustly before they take a vote.
Say it's voted on,
Yes.
and MPs say yes to this bill. What should we see within a year?
I'm praying really that that is voted for and it is finally assented to, for it to become law. It will bring out of a lot of change in the way our system works. Yeah, I can tell you.
Are people who are on death row going to be released?
No, there's always the issue of what time it's coming into effect. The transitional clauses. Okay.
I think on the question of release, before we leave it at that, because I think that would be a very alarming way to leave it. Once the death penalty is abolished, the idea will be everyone would go through either a process of commutation or resentencing. But ideally, it wouldn't be that the prison gates are then opened, because certain procedures have to be followed. So it would be a bit organized, and the criminal justice system would organize itself around the new bill. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie, thank you very much. Julie Matheka is a program manager at ICJ Kenya. The Honorable OPIYO Wandayi is the minority leader of the National Assembly. They've been our guest this morning as we commemorate World Day Against the Death Penalty. It's the 21st World Day Against the Death Penalty.